The cold came early to Wyoming in 1878, the kind that didn't just nip at your fingers but crawled inside your bones and made a home there. By mid-November, the prairie had turned into something mean. Wind that cut like broken glass. Snow that piled so high you couldn't tell where the road ended and the fields began. It was the sort of winter that killed things. Livestock, hope, people who weren't careful. Elena Cross had learned to be careful. She stood in the doorway of the boarding house, watching the street below through a window so fogged with cold she had to wipe it every few seconds just to see. Her breath came out in small clouds. Her fingers, red and stiff, clutched the edge of her shawl. She wasn't dressed for this kind of weather. Nobody in their right mind would be. But she'd been standing there for 20 minutes, waiting for a man she'd never met. Behind her, in the cramped room that smelled like old wood and mayu, her guardian sat at the table counting money. Thomas Ridley was a thick man with a face like boiled meat, all red and pocked and unpleasant to look at. He'd taken her in when her parents died 3 years ago, not out of kindness, but because there was money involved. A small inheritance, enough to make it worth his trouble. That money was gone now, and so, apparently, was his obligation to her. "Stop fidgeting," Ridley said without looking up from the bills he was smoothing flat on the table. "You're making me nervous." Elena didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the street. "Is he late?" "He'll be here." "What if he doesn't come?" Ridley's hands paused. He looked up at her then, and there was something in his expression that made her stomach tighten. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. "Then I'll find someone else. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're irreplaceable, girl. You're 19, healthy, and you can read. That's all most men need." She turned away from the window. "You're selling me." "I'm making arrangements." Ridley went back to his counting. "There's a difference." "No," Elena said quietly. "There isn't." He slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the coins jump. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy scraping together a future for an ungrateful girl who's done nothing but cost me money since the day she walked through my door?" Elena didn't flinch. She'd learned that too, how to stand still when someone tried to make you smaller. "You didn't have to take me in," she said. "And you didn't have to eat every day? But you did." Ridley stood, shoving the money into his coat pocket. "Silas Boone is a decent man. Widower. Owns a ranch out past the valley. He needs someone to help with his children, and you need a roof that isn't mine. It's a fair trade." "Fair for who?" Ridley's face darkened. For a second she thought he might hit her. He'd done it before. Not often, but enough that she knew the shape of his anger. Instead, he just shook his head and walked to the door. "He's here," Ridley said, looking out into the street. "Get your things." Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. She turned back to the window. A wagon had pulled up outside, rough-built and functional, the kind you used for hauling supplies or livestock. The horse hitched to it was a big gray gelding, its breath steaming in the cold. And sitting on the bench, reins loose in his hands, was a man. Silas Boone. Even from a distance, Elena could tell he wasn't what she'd expected. He was younger than Ridley, maybe mid-30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of something hard and then left unfinished. Dark hair, dark coat, shoulders broad enough to carry weight. He didn't look cruel, but he didn't look kind either. He looked tired. "Move," Ridley said, already heading down the stairs. Elena grabbed the canvas bag sitting by the door. Everything she owned fit inside it, and followed. Dag. The air outside hit her like a slap. She pulled her shawl tighter, but it didn't help. The wind tore through the thin fabric like it wasn't even there. Her boots crunched in the snow as she walked toward the wagon, Ridley a few steps ahead. Silas didn't get down. He just watched them approach, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Boone," Ridley said, sticking out his hand. Silas looked at it for a second, then shook. His grip was brief. "Ridley." "This is Elena." Ridley stepped aside, gesturing toward her like she was a piece of furniture he was trying to sell. 19, healthy, can cook, clean, read, and write. She'll do fine with your children. Silas's eyes shifted to her. They were gray, the color of the sky before a storm. He studied her face for a long moment, and Elena forced herself not to look away. She didn't know what he saw. A girl too skinny for her own good, maybe. Brown hair pulled back in a braid that was coming loose. eyes that had seen too much and somehow not enough. She wasn't pretty, she knew that. But she wasn't ugly either. She was just there. You understand what this is? Silas asked. His voice was low, rough around the edges, like he didn't use it much. Elena nodded. I'm to help with your children. And keep the house. Yes. It's not easy work. I'm not afraid of work. Silas's jaw tightened. He looked back at Ridley. The agreement was $50. Ridley smiled, all teeth. That's right. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded stack of bills. He counted them out slowly, then handed them over. Ridley took the money, counted it again just to be sure, and tucked it away. Pleasure doing business with you, Ridley said. He didn't look at Elena, didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked back toward the boarding house, his boots kicking up snow. And that was it. 3 years of her life bought and paid for in less than a minute. Elena stood there, bag in hand, staring at the place where Ridley had been. The cold pressed in around her, but she barely felt it. There was a strange numbness spreading through her chest, like something inside her had finally given up. Get in, Silas said. She turned. He was still sitting on the wagon bench, still watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Elena climbed up. The wood was rough under her hands, and the seat was narrow. She had to sit close to him, closer than she wanted, but there wasn't a choice. She set her bag between her feet and folded her hands in her lap. Silas flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward. They rode in silence. Sekem. The town fell away behind them, swallowed by snow and distance. The road, if you could call it that, was little more than a pair of ruts cut through the drifts. The wagon rocked and jolted with every bump, and Elena had to brace herself to keep from sliding into Silas. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her, just kept his eyes on the road and his hands steady on the reins. Elena studied him out of the corner of her eye. Up close, she could see the details Ridley's description had left out. The lines around his mouth, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his knuckles were scarred and rough, like he'd spent his whole life working with his hands. He looked like the kind of man who didn't waste words, the kind who carried weight without complaining about it, the kind who wouldn't notice if you disappeared. How far is it? Elena asked, more to break the silence than because she cared. 2 hours. Maybe 3, with the snow. His voice was flat. Not unkind, but not warm either. What are their names? She tried again. Your children. Silas's hands tightened on the reins. For a second, she thought he wasn't going to answer. Rowan, he said finally. He's 13. Then Caleb. He's 9. And June. She's 5. Elena nodded, filing the names away. How long has it been since their mother... 2 years. The words came out sharp, like a door slamming shut. Elena closed her mouth and didn't ask anything else. The silence stretched again, colder than the wind. The ranch appeared slowly, rising out of the white landscape like something built to withstand the end of the world. It wasn't much to look at. A main house, low and square, with a barn to one side and a few smaller outbuildings scattered around. Everything was gray or brown, weathered by wind and time. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and pale against the sky. It looked lonely. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down without a word. Elena sat there for a second, staring at the door, before she made herself move. Her legs were stiff from the cold, and she nearly stumbled getting down. Silas was already unhitching the horse. He didn't look at her. Inside, he said. They're waiting. Elena picked up her bag and walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the latch for a second. Then she pushed it open and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. Not comfortable, but enough to make her fingers sting as they thawed. The house was dim, lit by a fire in the hearth and a single oil lamp on the table. It smelled like wood smoke and something cooking, maybe stew. And standing in the middle of the room, watching her, were the children. The oldest, Rowan, was tall for his age, all sharp angles and wary eyes. He had his father's dark hair and the same hard line to his jaw. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression somewhere between suspicion and outright hostility. Caleb was smaller, rounder, with lighter hair and freckles scattered across his nose. He stood a little behind his brother, peeking out like he wasn't sure whether to be curious or afraid. And then there was June. She was tiny, delicate in a way that made Elena think of birds. Her hair was pale, almost white in the firelight, and her eyes, big and blue and solemn, watched Elena like she was trying to figure out if she was real. Nobody spoke. Elena set her bag down by the door and forced a smile. "Hello." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "I'm Elena." "Why are you here?" The question wasn't rude exactly, just direct, honest in the way children were before they learned to lie. "I'm here to help," Elena said carefully. "Your father—" "We don't need help." The door opened behind her, letting in a gust of cold air. Silas stepped inside, stomping snow off his boots. The children's attention shifted to him immediately. "Pa?" Rowan said, his voice tight. "What's going on?" Silas closed the door. He looked at his children, then at Elena, and for a second, something almost like regret crossed his face. "This is Elena Cross," he said. "She's going to be staying with us." "Why?" Rowan demanded. "Because I said so." That's not an answer. Silas's jaw tightened. "It's the only one you're getting." Rowan's face flushed. He looked like he wanted to say more, wanted to argue, to push back, but something in his father's expression stopped him. Instead, he just turned and walked toward the back of the house, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards. A door slammed. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. June's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't make a sound. Silas sighed, low and tired. "Caleb, show her where to put her things." "June, come here." Caleb nodded and motioned for Elena to follow. She picked up her bag and walked after him, past the main room and down a narrow hallway. He stopped at a small door and pushed it open. "This is yours," he said quietly. The room was barely big enough for a bed and a chest of drawers. The walls were plain wood, the floor was cold, and there was a single window that looked out onto nothing but snow. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had at Ridley's. "Thank you," Elena said. Caleb nodded and left without another word. Elena stood in the doorway, staring at the empty room. Then she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Dinner was quiet. Elena sat at the table with the children while Silas ladled stew into bowls. Nobody spoke. Rowan stared at his food like it had personally offended him. Caleb ate quickly, eyes down. June picked at her bowl, occasionally glancing at Elena when she thought no one was looking. Silas sat at the head of the table, eating in silence. Elena tried to eat, but her stomach was too knotted to hold much. The stew was plain but edible: potatoes, carrots, some kind of meat she didn't recognize. She forced down a few bites, and then set her spoon aside. "Not hungry?" Silas asked. It was the first thing he'd said since they sat down. "I'm fine," Elena said. "Just tired." He nodded and went back to his food. When the meal was over, Elena stood and started collecting the bowls. Rowan watched her like she was about to steal something. "You don't have to do that," Silas said. "I know." She carried the dishes to the basin by the fire and started washing them. The water was cold and her hands were still sore from the wagon ride, but she didn't stop. Behind her, she could hear Silas talking to the children in a low voice. "Bed, all of you." "But Pa—" "Now." There was the sound of chairs scraping, footsteps, doors closing, and then silence. Elena finished the dishes and dried her hands on a rag. When she turned around, Silas was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. "You should get some sleep," he said, without looking at her. "Tomorrow starts early." "What do you need me to do?" "Breakfast, laundry, mending, whatever needs doing." He paused. "The children don't know you. Don't expect them to trust you right away." "I won't." Silas finally looked at her. His expression was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes, something tired and heavy and a little bit lost. "This isn't—" He stopped, shook his head. "Just do your job. That's all I'm asking." Elena nodded. "Understood." She turned and walked back to her room, closing the door behind her. The bed was narrow and the blanket was thin, but it was better than the floor. She lay down, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the house was silent. And somewhere in that silence, Elena Cross, bought for $50 and expected to disappear into someone else's life, closed her eyes, and tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Msin, she woke before dawn. The cold had crept in during the night, turning her breath to fog. Elena sat up, shivering, and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Her body ached from the wagon ride, and her hands were stiff. But she didn't let herself stop. She got dressed, splashed freezing water on her face from the basin in her room, and walked out into the main room. The fire had died down to embers. The house was dark and still. Elena knelt by the hearth and started rebuilding the fire, adding kindling and blowing gently until the flames caught. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold. She found the kitchen, really just a corner of the main room with a stove and a few shelves, and started looking through the supplies. Flour, salt, a bit of bacon, some eggs, enough to make breakfast. She worked quietly, her hands moving through the familiar motions, mixing batter, heating the pan, frying bacon until it hissed and spat. By the time the sun started to rise, pale and weak through the window, the smell of food filled the house. The children appeared one by one. Caleb first, rubbing his eyes. Then June, clutching a rag doll with half its stuffing missing. And finally Rowan, dressed and scowling. They sat at the table without speaking. Elena set plates in front of them, bacon, eggs, biscuits. They stared at the food like they weren't sure what to do with it. "Where's Pa?" Rowan asked. "Outside," Elena said. She'd seen him through the window earlier, heading toward the barn. Rowan picked up his fork, still watching her. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." "Then why did you?" Elena met his eyes. "Because you have to eat." It wasn't a clever answer. It wasn't kind or warm or designed to win him over. It was just the truth. Rowan's scowl deepened, but he started eating. Caleb followed his lead, shoveling food into his mouth like he was afraid it might disappear. June ate slowly, carefully, still watching Elena with those big, solemn eyes. When Silas came in, snow dusting his shoulders, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, at the food, at Elena standing by the stove. "You didn't have to," he said. "Everyone keeps saying that." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't last. He sat down, and Elena set a plate in front of him. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena nodded and turned back to the stove. Nod. The days blurred together after that. Elena woke before dawn, built the fire, made breakfast, washed dishes, hauled water from the pump outside, even when the cold made her hands bleed, scrubbed floors, mended clothes, cooked dinner, washed more dishes, fell into bed, exhausted, and did it all again the next day. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done at Ridley's, but it was also something else. It was necessary. The children needed clean clothes. They needed food. They needed someone to notice when Caleb's coat was too small or when June's shoes had holes in them. And Silas, he needed someone to carry the weight he couldn't. She saw it in the way he moved, always tired, always working. The way he'd come in from the barn with his hands cracked and bleeding and just wrap them in rags before going back out. The way he'd sit at the table after dinner, staring at nothing, like he was trying to remember something he'd lost. He didn't talk to her, not really. But sometimes in the mornings, she'd find things, small things. A broken chair leg fixed, the woodpile restocked, her coat torn from catching on a nail, mended with careful, uneven stitches. He never said anything about it, and she never asked. Shit. Rowan was the hardest. He watched her constantly, his eyes sharp and suspicious. He didn't speak to her unless he had to, and when he did, his voice was cold. One morning, she found him in the barn, mucking out stalls. She'd come to collect eggs, but she stopped when she saw him. "Need help?" she asked. "No." "I don't mind." Rowan threw down the pitchfork and turned to face her, his jaw tight. "Why are you here?" Elena blinked. "Your father, I know what he said. I'm asking why you're really here." "I don't understand." Rowan stepped closer, and for a second he looked older than 13. He looked hard and angry and scared. "My mother died 2 years ago," he said, "and now you show up, and you're cooking and cleaning and acting like you belong here. But you don't. You're not her. You'll never be her." The words hit harder than Elena expected. She stood there staring at him, trying to find something to say. But what could she say? He was right. I'm not trying to be, she said finally. I'm just trying to help. We don't need your help. Then why did your father bring me here? Rowan's face flushed. He turned away, grabbing the pitchfork again. Get out. Elena left. Caleb was easier. He didn't say much, but he didn't glare at her either. Sometimes when she was working, he'd appear and just sit nearby, watching, quiet. One afternoon, she found him outside trying to fix a broken wagon wheel. He was struggling, his hands too small for the job. Elena knelt beside him. Can I try? He looked at her, uncertain. Then he nodded and handed her the tool. Together, they worked in silence. When the wheel was fixed, Caleb smiled, small and quick, like he was afraid someone might see. Thanks, he said. You're welcome. He ran off, and Elena stayed there, kneeling in the snow, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. June was the mystery. She barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost, pale and silent. She never cried, never laughed, never seemed to feel anything at all. But she watched Elena, always watching. One night, Elena woke to a sound, soft and rhythmic, crying. She got up and followed the sound to June's room. The door was cracked open. Inside, June sat on her bed, hugging her doll, tears streaming down her face. Elena pushed the door open. June? The little girl looked up, her eyes wide and wet. Can I come in? Elena asked. June didn't answer, but she didn't say no. Elena sat on the edge of the bed. Bad dream? June nodded. Do you want to talk about it? June shook her head. Elena reached out slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair out of June's face. The little girl flinched, but she didn't pull away. It's okay, Elena said softly. You're safe. June's lip trembled. Then, so quietly, Elena almost didn't hear it, she whispered, I miss her. Elena's throat tightened. I know. Do you? The question was small, but it cut deep. Elena thought about her own mother, the way she'd smelled like lavender, the way she'd hum while she worked, the way she'd been there one day and gone the next, leaving nothing but silence. Yes, Elena said. I do. June stared at her for a long moment. Then she climbed into Elena's lap and buried her face in her shoulder. Elena held her, rocking gently, until the tears stopped and June's breathing evened out. When she finally carried the little girl back to bed, June's hand reached out and caught hers. Stay, June whispered. Elena stayed. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher. The wind grew meaner. And inside the Boone Ranch, something slow and fragile started to grow. Caleb started helping Elena with chores without being asked. June began sitting closer to her at meals. Even Rowan, still distant, still wary, stopped glaring quite so much. Silas noticed. Elena could see it in the way he watched them, his expression unreadable. Sometimes late at night, she'd catch him staring at her across the table, and she'd wonder what he was thinking. But he never said. And then in the third week of December, June got sick. It started small. A cough. A fever. Nothing alarming. But by the second day, June was burning up, her skin hot and dry to the touch. She couldn't keep food down. Couldn't stay awake. Silas rode into town for the doctor, but the storm had closed the roads. He came back empty-handed, his face grim. We'll have to wait it out, he said. Elena didn't wait. She moved into June's room and didn't leave. She sponged the little girl's forehead with cool water, made her sip broth, even when she fought it, sat beside her through the long, dark hours when the fever spiked and June cried for her mother. Rowan stood in the doorway one night, watching. Is she going to die? He asked, his voice small. Elena looked up at him. No. How do you know? Because I won't let her. It wasn't logic, it wasn't medicine, it was just the truth. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. On the fourth night, the fever broke. June opened her eyes, clear and focused, and whispered, I'm thirsty. Elena nearly sobbed with relief. She gave June water, then soup, then held her while she fell back asleep. This time peaceful, not restless. When Silas came to check on them, Elena was still sitting there, her head resting against the wall, half asleep. "She's better," Elena said without opening her eyes. Silas knelt beside the bed, his hand hovering over June's forehead. When he felt the cool skin, his shoulders sagged. "Thank you," he said. Elena opened her eyes. Silas was looking at her, and for the first time there was something in his expression that wasn't just tired or distant, it was gratitude, real and raw. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Elena smiled, faint and exhausted. "Everyone keeps saying that." This time Silas did smile. Small, but there. He stood and left the room, and Elena closed her eyes again. The next morning, June woke up asking for breakfast. Elena made her porridge, and June ate it sitting up in bed, chattering about her doll and the snow and whether Caleb would play with her later. When Elena finally left the room, she found Rowan waiting in the hallway. He didn't say anything, just looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes red. Then he turned and walked away. But the next day, Elena found something on the kitchen table. A small wooden bird carved rough but careful. No note, no explanation. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Elena Cross smiled and meant it. The wooden bird sat on the windowsill in Elena's room, catching the pale winter light. She looked at it every morning when she woke, and every night before she slept. It wasn't much, rough edges, uneven wings, but it meant something. She wasn't sure what exactly. Maybe that she was no longer invisible. Maybe that survival could turn into something else if you waited long enough. Christmas came and went without ceremony. There was no tree, no presents, no singing. Silas worked through the day like it was any other, and the children moved through the house quietly, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Elena made a special dinner, roasted chicken, potatoes with butter, biscuits that actually rose properly, and they ate together in silence broken only by the scrape of forks and the crackling fire. June fell asleep at the table, her head drooping forward until her chin nearly touched her plate. Silas picked her up without a word and carried her to bed. When he came back, Rowan and Caleb had already disappeared to their room. Elena stood at the basin, washing dishes, her hands red from the hot water. "You didn't have to do all this," Silas said behind her. Elena didn't turn around. "I know. I mean it. The dinner, everything." She set a plate on the drying rack. "They're children. They deserve something special, even if they don't ask for it." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he moved closer, close enough that she could feel him standing there, a presence at her shoulder. "Their mother used to make a big meal on Christmas," he said. "Turkey, pies, the whole thing. The house would smell like cinnamon for days." He paused. "I thought it would be easier if we just didn't, if we treated it like any other day." Elena rinsed another plate. "Was it? Easier?" "No." She finally looked at him. His face was tired, the lines around his eyes deeper in the lamplight. He looked like a man who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "Nothing about this is easy," she said quietly. Silas met her eyes, and for a second, something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "I should check the barn. Storm's supposed to get worse tonight. Be careful." He nodded and left, pulling on his coat and disappearing into the cold. Elena watched the door close behind him, then went back to the dishes. The storm did get worse. By morning, the snow was piled so high against the house that Silas had to dig them out just to get to the barn. The wind howled for 3 straight days, shaking the walls and finding every crack in the wood. They stayed inside, huddled close to the fire, burning through their supply of wood faster than Elena liked. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sky cleared to a blue so bright it hurt to look at, and the world outside was buried under a blanket of white that stretched as far as the eye could see. Silas went out to check the animals. He came back an hour later, stomping snow off his boots, his face grim. "Lost 2 chickens," he said, "and one of the horses is limping. I'll have to watch him." Elena nodded. She'd learned not to ask questions when he came in looking like that. Bad news didn't get better by talking about it. But Caleb, who'd been sitting by the fire whittling a piece of wood, looked up. "Is it rusty?" Silas hesitated. "Yeah." Caleb's face fell. Rusty was his favorite. A chestnut mare with a white blaze, gentle enough that even June could ride her. Is she going to be okay? Caleb asked. I don't know yet. Caleb set down his knife and stood. Can I go see her? Not now, let her rest. But I said no, Caleb. The boy's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. He just sat back down, his hands balled into fists on his knees. Elena watched him for a moment, then moved to the stove. I'm making stew. Who wants to help me with the vegetables? June's hand shot up. Me! Caleb didn't move, but after a second he picked up his knife and went back to whittling, the cuts sharper and harder than before. The day wore on. Silas went back out to the barn twice more, each time staying longer. Elena kept the children busy. June helped with the stew, Rowan chopped wood, Caleb reluctantly peeled potatoes. But the house felt tense, like everyone was waiting for something bad to happen. That night, after the children were in bed, Elena found Silas sitting at the table with a bottle of whiskey. He wasn't drinking, just staring at it. How bad is it? Elena asked. Silas looked up. His eyes were red, whether from exhaustion or emotion she couldn't tell. Bad, he said. She's not putting weight on the leg. If it's broken, I'll have to... He stopped, jaw tight. Elena sat down across from him. You don't know that yet. I know enough. Then you wait, and you see. And if it comes to it, you do what needs doing. She paused. But you don't give up before you have to. Silas studied her face, something unreadable in his expression. You talk like someone who's had to do that before. We all have. He finally picked up the bottle, pulled the cork, and poured a small measure into a tin cup. He slid it across the table to her. I don't drink, Elena said. Tonight you do. She looked at the cup, then at him. Then she picked it up and took a sip. The whiskey burned going down, but it left a warmth behind that spread through her chest. She set the cup down and pushed it back toward him. Silas took a drink, then set the bottle aside. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low, the wind quiet outside. Thank you, Silas said finally, for what you did for June, for all of it. Elena shook her head. You already thanked me. I know, but I mean it. She met his eyes. I know you do. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like regret. But before she could name it, he stood, picking up the bottle. Get some sleep, he said. Morning comes early. He walked to his room and closed the door, leaving Elena alone by the dying fire. By the end of January, the tension in the house had settled into something almost normal. Rusty's leg healed, not broken after all, just badly strained, and Caleb spent every spare moment in the barn with her. Rowan still kept his distance from Elena, but he'd stopped looking at her like she was an intruder. June followed Elena everywhere, chattering about everything and nothing, her pale hair always coming loose from its braid. And Silas was harder to read. He still didn't talk much, still worked from dawn until long after dark. But Elena started noticing things, the way he'd glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he'd linger in the kitchen after meals, finding small tasks that kept him there while she worked, the way he'd ask her opinion on things, what to plan in the spring, whether Caleb's coat could be mended or needed replacing, like her thoughts mattered. One morning, Elena woke to find a new pair of boots outside her door. They were plain, sturdy, the leather still stiff. No note. No explanation. She picked them up and went to find Silas. He was in the barn, mending a harness. Did you leave these? Elena asked, holding up the boots. Silas glanced at them, then went back to his work. Your old ones had holes. You didn't have to... I know. Elena stood there for a moment, the boots heavy in her hands. Thank you. Silas just nodded, his hand steady on the leather. She turned to leave, then stopped. Silas? He looked up. Why did you really bring me here? The question hung in the air between them. Silas set down the harness, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Because I couldn't do it alone anymore, he said finally. The ranch, the children, all of it. I thought if I just kept working, kept moving, it would get easier. But it didn't. He looked at her, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. I needed help, that's all. Elena nodded slowly. That's all? Silas held her gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up the harness again. That's all. But something in the way he said it made her think he was lying. February brought a thaw. The snow melted into slush and the fields turned to mud. The house felt warmer, brighter, like the light was finally reaching places it hadn't touched in months. The children grew louder, bolder. Caleb laughed more. June sang little songs while she played with her doll. Even Rowan seemed lighter, though he still watched Elena with careful eyes. One afternoon, Elena was outside hanging laundry when she heard shouting. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the barn. Inside, she found Rowan and Silas facing each other, both red-faced, both breathing hard. "I'm old enough," Rowan was saying, his voice cracking. "I can do it." "No," Silas said flatly. "Why not? Because you think I'll mess it up? Because you don't trust me? Because you're 13 years old, and that bull will kill you if you're not careful." "I am careful. I've been helping you for years, and you still treat me like I'm a kid." "You are a kid." Rowan's hands balled into fists. "I'm the same age you were when you started working your father's ranch." "And I still have the scars to prove it." Silas's voice was louder now, rough with anger. "You think I want that for you? You think I want to watch you get hurt because you're too stubborn to listen?" "I'm not you, Pa. I'm not going to break just because—" "Enough!" The word came out sharp, final. Rowan's mouth snapped shut, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Silas turned away, his shoulders tense. "Go to the house. Pa—" "Now, Rowan." Rowan stood there for a second, shaking with anger or hurt or both. Then he turned and stormed past Elena without looking at her. The barn fell silent except for the sound of Silas's breathing. Elena stepped forward carefully. "Are you all right?" Silas didn't turn around. "Fine. He's just trying to help." "I know what he's trying to do." Silas's voice was tight. "And I know what'll happen if I let him." Elena moved closer. "He's growing up, Silas. You can't protect him from everything." "I can try." "Not forever." Silas finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes stopped her cold. It wasn't anger, it was fear, raw and desperate and barely contained. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I already lost her. I can't—" His voice broke. He looked away, jaw clenched. "I can't lose them too." Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but every word that came to mind felt too small for the weight of what he was carrying. "You won't," she said finally. "You don't know that." "No, but I know you, and I know you'll do everything you can to keep them safe." She paused. "But keeping them safe doesn't mean keeping them small." Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to his work without another word. Elena left the barn and went to find Rowan. He was sitting behind the woodshed, his back against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest. His face was red, and he was crying, not loud, but hard, the kind of crying that hurt. Elena sat down beside him without asking. For a while, neither of them spoke. "He doesn't trust me," Rowan said finally, his voice thick. "That's not true." "Then why won't he let me help?" Elena chose her words carefully. "Because he's afraid." Rowan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Of what? Me getting hurt?" "Of losing you." Rowan looked at her, his eyes red and confused. "But I'm right here." "I know, but fear doesn't always make sense." Elena pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "Your father's been carrying a lot for a long time. He lost your mother. He almost lost June. He's terrified that if he lets his guard down for even a second, something else will be taken from him." Rowan was quiet, staring at his hands. "It's not fair." "No," Elena agreed. "It's not. I just want to help. I want him to see that I'm not a kid anymore." "He sees it. That's what scares him." Rowan's jaw tightened. "So what am I supposed to do? Just wait until he decides I'm old enough?" "No. You keep showing up. You keep working. You prove to him that you're not going anywhere." Elena paused. "And you give him time to stop being so afraid." Rowan didn't say anything for a long time. Then quietly, "Do you think he'll ever let me?" "I think he will, when he's ready." Rowan nodded, slow and uncertain. Then he stood, brushing dirt off his pants. "Thanks." Elena watched him walk back toward the house, his shoulders a little straighter than before. That night, at dinner, Silas and Rowan didn't speak to each other. The silence was thick and uncomfortable, and Caleb kept glancing between them like he was waiting for something to explode. After the meal, Silas stood and picked up his coat. "Where are you going?" June asked. "Barn. Need to check on the animals." Rowan stood too. I'll come with you. Silas paused, his hand on the door. For a second, Elena thought he was going to say no, but then he nodded. All right. They left together, and Elena watched through the window as they walked side by side across the yard, neither speaking, both carrying the same stiff pride in their shoulders. March brought mud and rain and the slow, stubborn promise of spring. The snow finally melted completely, leaving the fields brown and wet. Birds started appearing again, their songs thin but persistent. The days grew longer, the light softer, and the house, bit by bit, started to feel like something other than just a place to survive. Elena found herself laughing more, at June's endless questions, at Caleb's terrible jokes, at the way Rowan tried to act grown up and still forgot to comb his hair most mornings. Even Silas smiled occasionally, quick and rare, but real. One evening, after the children were in bed, Elena sat by the fire mending one of Caleb's shirts. Silas sat across from her, working on a piece of leather, his hand steady and sure. You're good at that, Elena said, nodding toward the harness he was repairing. Had a lot of practice. Did your father teach you? Silas's hand stilled for a second. Yeah, before he died. Elena waited, but he didn't say more. She went back to her sewing. After a while, Silas set down his work and looked at her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did Ridley sell you? The question caught her off guard. Elena's needle paused mid-stitch. I told you, the money ran out. That's not an answer. Elena set the shirt in her lap, staring at the fabric. My parents left me a small inheritance when they died. Ridley was named my guardian, but the money was supposed to be held in trust until I turned 21. She paused. He spent it, all of it. And when there was nothing left, he decided I wasn't worth keeping. Silas's jaw tightened. So he sold you? He called it making arrangements. It's the same thing. Elena looked up at him. Yes, it is. Silas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Did he hurt you? The question was quiet, but there was something sharp underneath it. Sometimes, Elena said honestly. Not often, but enough. Silas's hands curled into fists. If I ever see him again, don't. Elena's voice was firm. It's over. He's gone, and I'm here, and that's all that matters. Silas stared at her, his expression caught somewhere between anger and something else. You deserve better than what he did to you. Maybe, but I'm not sure I deserve what you've given me. Silas frowned. What do you mean? Elena gestured around the room. This, a home. Children who are starting to trust me. Work that matters. She paused. I was bought, Silas. Like livestock. And somehow I ended up here, and it's more than I ever thought I'd have. Silas shook his head slowly. You weren't bought, Elena. You were hired. There's a difference? There has to be. Elena held his gaze. Then what am I to you? Really? The question hung between them, heavy and unanswerable. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away, his jaw working. He stopped. Started again. You're someone who showed up when I needed help and stayed when you didn't have to. Someone who cares about my children like they're your own. Someone who makes this place feel less empty. He finally looked at her. That's what you are. Elena's chest tightened. Thank you. For what? For saying that. Silas nodded, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his work again, and they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of shouting outside. She threw on her shawl and ran out to find Caleb in the yard, yelling for his father. Pa! Pa! Come quick! Silas appeared from the barn, running. What is it? It's Rowan! He's in the creek! Elena's heart dropped. She followed Silas and Caleb as they ran toward the creek at the edge of the property. When they got there, she saw Rowan standing waist-deep in the rushing water, his face pale, holding something in his arms. A lamb. I heard it bleeding, Rowan called over the sound of the water. It must have fallen in upstream. Get out of there, Silas shouted. I've got it. Just let me. Rowan's foot slipped. He went under, the lamb thrashing in his arms. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Silas didn't hesitate. He waded in, fighting the current, and grabbed Rowan by the back of his coat. He hauled him up, and together they stumbled back to the bank, both soaked and shaking. The lamb bleated pitifully, but it was alive. Rowan coughed up water, gasping. "I got it. I got the lamb." Silas stared at him, chest heaving, his face a mix of fury and terror. "You could have drowned." "But I didn't. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Rowan's voice was sharp. "That I should have just let it die? Yes, if it meant keeping yourself safe, yes." Rowan's face twisted. "That's not what you would have done. I'm not 13 years old, and I'm not helpless." They glared at each other, both dripping, both shaking with more than just cold. Then Silas pulled Rowan into a rough hug, his hand gripping the back of the boy's head. "Don't ever do that again," Silas said, his voice breaking. "You hear me? Don't ever scare me like that." Rowan stood stiff for a second. Then his arms came up, wrapping around his father, and he buried his face in Silas's shoulder. Elena turned away, giving them privacy. Caleb stood beside her, wide-eyed. "Is Rowan okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," Elena said quietly. "He's okay." They walked back to the house, and Elena got towels and dry clothes ready. When Silas and Rowan finally came in, both silent and exhausted, she handed them the towels without a word. Rowan looked at her, his eyes red. "I wasn't trying to be stupid." "I know. I just didn't want it to die." "I know," Elena said again. "But next time, call for help first." Rowan nodded. He disappeared into his room to change, and Silas stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. "He's brave," Elena said quietly. "He's reckless." "Maybe, but he saved that lamb." Silas looked at her, his expression raw. "And if he'd drowned doing it, would it have been worth it?" Elena didn't have an answer for that. That night, the house was quiet. The lamb, wrapped in blankets by the fire, bleated occasionally, but otherwise everyone was subdued. Rowan sat in the corner, still pale, still shaken. Silas sat at the table, staring into his cup of coffee. Elena made stew, even though no one seemed hungry. She set bowls on the table and sat down. "Eat," she said. No one moved. "I mean it. All of you. Eat." Slowly they picked up their spoons. The stew was good, rich and warm and filling. Caleb finished first, then June. Rowan ate mechanically, his eyes distant. When the meal was over, Silas stood. "I'll check the barn." "I'll come with you," Rowan said. Silas hesitated, then nodded. Elena watched them leave, side by side again, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly, but something close. April arrived with wildflowers and warmer winds. The prairie came back to life slowly, green pushing through the brown. The children spent more time outside, chasing each other through the fields, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Elena found herself smiling without meaning to, found herself humming while she worked, found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. One afternoon she was in the garden, newly turned and ready for planting, when Silas appeared. "Need help?" he asked. Elena looked up, shading her eyes from the sun. "I thought you were fixing the fence." "I was. Finished early." He knelt beside her, and together they worked in comfortable silence, pressing seeds into the earth. His hands were scarred and rough, but they moved with surprising gentleness. "Elena," Silas said after a while. "Hmm?" "I've been thinking." She glanced at him. "About what?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept working, his jaw tight. "About this," he said finally. "About us. About what this is." Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. "What do you mean?" Silas sat back on his heels, wiping dirt from his hands. "When I brought you here, it was supposed to be simple. You'd help with the children, keep the house, and that would be it. No complications. And it's not simple anymore." Elena set down the seeds, her hands trembling slightly. "Silas, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. I need you to know that you're not just hired help. Not to me. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, fragile and enormous. "Then what am I?" Elena asked quietly. Silas looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, Not distance, just fear. I don't know, he said, but I know I don't want you to leave. Elena's breath caught. I'm not going anywhere. You say that now, but I mean it. She reached out, her hand covering his. I'm staying, Silas, as long as you'll have me. Silas stared at their joined hands, his throat working. Then he nodded, slow and careful, like he was afraid to believe her. They went back to planting, but something had shifted, something quiet and profound and terrifying, and neither of them knew what to do with it. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena sat by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Silas sat across from her, silent as always. Can I ask you something? Elena said. Yeah. What was she like? Your wife? Silas's expression shuddered. Why do you want to know? Because the children loved her. And you did too. And I think I need to understand who I'm not. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he started to speak. Her name was Mary. She was kind, patient, better at this than I ever was. The children, the house, all of it. She made everything feel easy. He paused. When she died, it was like the light went out, and I didn't know how to turn it back on. You still love her, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Silas said. I do. I always will. Elena nodded. That's okay. Silas looked at her surprised. Is it? Of course. She was your wife, the mother of your children. Loving her doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Silas's jaw tightened. But it's not fair to you. Why not? Because you deserve someone who can give you everything, and I can't. Part of me will always belong to her. Elena leaned forward, her eyes steady on his. I'm not asking for everything, Silas. I'm just asking for what you can give. Silas stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure it out. Together. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Silas stood and walked to the door, pulling on his coat. I need to check the barn, he said, his voice rough. Elena watched him leave, and this time she knew he wasn't going to check the animals. He was going to hide. The barn door closed behind Silas with a hollow thud that echoed across the quiet yard. Elena sat alone by the fire, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the flames until they blurred. She'd said the wrong thing, or maybe the right thing at the wrong time. With Silas, it was hard to tell. He kept himself locked up so tight that every conversation felt like trying to open a door that someone had nailed shut from the inside. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark shape of the barn against the night sky. A single lantern glowed inside, throwing long shadows across the snow. She wondered what he was doing out there. Probably just standing in the cold, wrestling with whatever it was he couldn't say out loud. Elena turned away and went to check on the children. June was curled up like a kitten, her doll clutched to her chest. Caleb slept on his stomach, one arm hanging off the bed. Rowan's room was dark, but she could hear his breathing, steady and deep. She stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house settling. This place had become something to her. Not home, exactly. She wasn't sure she knew what that word meant anymore. But something close. A place where she mattered, where her presence made a difference. And now she'd gone and complicated it by asking Silas questions he didn't want to answer. Elena went back to her room and lay down without undressing. Sleep didn't come easy. She kept thinking about the look on Silas's face when she'd asked about his wife, the way his whole body had tensed like she'd touched a wound that hadn't healed. Maybe she should have kept her mouth shut. Maybe some things were better left alone. But she'd never been good at leaving things alone. The next morning, Silas was already gone when Elena woke. His coat was missing from the hook, and the fire had been rebuilt recently enough that the logs still crackled with fresh flame. She made breakfast in silence, her hands moving through the familiar routine while her mind stayed somewhere else. The children came out one by one, rubbing sleep from their eyes. June climbed into her chair and reached for the biscuits before Elena had even set the plate down. "Where's Pa?" Caleb asked, looking around. "Out," Elena said, pouring milk into cups. "Eat your breakfast." Rowan appeared last, his hair sticking up on one side. He sat down without a word and started eating, his movements mechanical. "Did you sleep all right?" Elena asked him. He shrugged. "Fine. Your father said you did a brave thing yesterday. With the lamb." Rowan's eyes flicked up to hers, surprised. He did? He did. He also said you scared him half to death. Yeah, I got that part. Rowan pushed food around his plate. Is he mad at me? Elena sat down across from him. No, I think he's scared. There's a difference. Doesn't feel different. I know. They finished breakfast in quiet, and Elena sent the children out to do their chores. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, started a pot of stew for dinner. All the while, she kept glancing at the window, waiting for Silas to come back. He didn't. By midday, Elena was starting to worry. She put on her coat and walked out to the barn, her boots squelching in the mud. Inside, the air smelled like hay and leather and animals. The horses shifted in their stalls, and the lamb Rowan had saved bleated from its pen in the corner. But Silas wasn't there. Elena checked the other outbuildings. The shed, the chicken coop, the storage room. Nothing. She walked to the edge of the property, scanning the horizon. The prairie stretched out in every direction, empty except for the wind moving through the grass. Her chest tightened. Where was he? Then she saw movement near the old cottonwood at the far edge of the fields. She walked toward it, her heart beating faster with each step. Silas was sitting at the base of the tree, his back against the trunk, staring at a small wooden cross half buried in the ground. Elena stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure if she should be there. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to intrude. Silas didn't look at her. You're not. Elena moved closer, carefully, and sat down beside him. The ground was cold and damp, but she didn't care. She looked at the cross, reading the name carved into the wood. Mary Boone. This is where you buried her, Elena said. Yeah. It's peaceful. Silas let out a bitter laugh. She hated the quiet. Always wanted noise, laughter, people around. Said the silence made her feel lonely. He paused. And here she is, nothing but silence. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat together in the cold, the wind rustling through the bare branches above them. I come here sometimes, Silas said after a while, when things get too loud in my head. I sit here and talk to her, tell her about the children, about the ranch, about how much harder it is than I thought it would be. He finally looked at Elena. I told her about you. Elena's breath caught. What did you say? That I don't know what I'm doing, that I brought you here because I was desperate and didn't have another choice. That I thought it would be simple, and it's not. He looked back at the cross. That I'm scared I'm betraying her just by letting myself feel anything at all. Silas, I loved her, Elena, so much it hurt. And when she died, I thought that was it. I thought I'd used up all the love I had and there wasn't any left. His voice cracked. But then you showed up and you took care of my children like they were your own, and you made this place feel less empty, and He stopped, his hands clenched into fists. I don't know what to do with that. Elena's throat tightened. She reached out slowly and covered his hand with hers. His skin was cold, rough, trembling. You don't have to do anything, she said. You don't have to figure it all out right now. You just have to let yourself feel it. And if it's wrong? What if it's not? Silas looked at her, and for the first time she saw him without the walls he kept between himself and the world. He looked lost, exhausted, human. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. Then don't. I don't know if I can promise that. Elena squeezed his hand. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking you to try. They sat there for a long time, hands joined, neither speaking. The wind blew cold across the prairie, but Elena barely felt it. All she felt was the weight of Silas's hand in hers and the knowledge that something between them had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Finally, Silas stood, pulling her up with him. We should get back. The children will worry. Elena nodded. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty. Full. That night, things felt different. Silas sat with them through dinner instead of disappearing to the barn afterward. He helped June with her reading, sounding out words with her until she got them right. He listened to Caleb talk about the new calf that had been born that morning, asking questions and nodding at the answers. And when Rowan came to him with a question about mending a saddle, Silas didn't brush him off. He brought the boy to the table and showed him how to do it, his hands patient, his voice steady. Elena watched from the kitchen, her hands in the wash basin, and felt something warm and fragile growing in her chest. Later, after the children were asleep, Silas found her sitting by the fire with a book she wasn't really reading. "Can I sit?" he asked. Elena nodded, and he sat down across from her, his hands folded between his knees. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At what?" "Talking, feeling things, being anything other than what I've been for the past 2 years." He looked at her. "But I want to try, for you, for the children, for myself." Elena set the book aside. "That's all I'm asking." Silas nodded slowly. Then he stood and walked to his room, pausing at the door. "Thank you, Elena, for everything." She watched him disappear, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, she let herself imagine a future here that wasn't just survival. The weeks that followed felt like spring breaking through frozen ground, slow, uncertain, but undeniable. Silas started talking more, not in long speeches, but in small moments. He'd tell her about his day while she cooked. He'd ask her opinion on things that mattered. He'd laugh at something Caleb said, and the sound would fill the house like light. The children noticed. June started calling her Mama Elena without hesitation. Caleb followed her everywhere, chattering about everything he saw. Even Rowan, still guarded, started leaving her small gifts: carved animals, smooth stones, wildflowers pressed between pages. Elena felt herself softening. The hard edges she'd built to survive at Ridley's began to wear away, replaced by something gentler. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling at nothing, feeling something that might have been happiness. But happiness, she'd learned, was a fragile thing. It was a warm afternoon in late April when the stranger rode up to the house. Elena was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She stood, shading her eyes, and watched a well-dressed man on a black horse approach. Silas appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" The stranger dismounted, tipping his hat. "Name's Harrison. I'm looking for Silas Boone." "That's me." "Mind if we talk? Got a business proposition for you." Silas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "All right." They walked to the barn together, and Elena went back to her weeding, trying not to let curiosity get the better of her. But she couldn't help glancing over every few minutes, watching the two men talk. After about 20 minutes, Harrison came out, shook Silas's hand, and rode off. Silas stood in the doorway of the barn, staring after him, his expression unreadable. Elena set down her tools and walked over. What did he want? Silas didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the road where Harrison had disappeared. "He wants to buy the ranch," Silas said finally. Elena's stomach dropped. "What?" "Says he's buying up land in the area. Made me an offer, a good one." "And?" Silas turned to look at her. "And I told him I'd think about it." Elena felt like she'd been slapped. "You're considering it?" "I don't know. Maybe." Silas rubbed a hand over his face. "It's a lot of money, Elena. Enough to set the children up somewhere better, somewhere they don't have to work themselves to death just to survive." "But this is your home. This is a piece of land with a house on it. That's all." "No, it's not." Elena's voice rose. "It's where your children grew up. It's where your wife is buried. It's killing me." The words came out harsh, raw. "Every day, trying to keep this place running, trying to keep everyone safe and fed and alive. It's too much, Elena. I can't do it anymore." Elena stared at him, her chest tight. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "When will you know?" "I don't know that either." Silas turned and walked back into the barn, leaving her standing there. Elena went back to the house, her hands shaking. She tried to focus on dinner, on the children, on anything but the sick feeling in her stomach. But it was no use. The thought of leaving this place, of starting over somewhere else, made her feel like she was drowning. At dinner, Silas was quiet. The children didn't notice. They were too busy arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. But Elena noticed. She saw the way he barely touched his food, the way his eyes kept drifting to the window. After the meal, she cornered him by the fire. "We need to talk about this." "Not now." "Yes, now." Elena crossed her arms. "You can't just drop something like that and then walk away. The children deserve to know what's happening. I don't want to worry them until I've made a decision." "And what about me? Don't I get a say in this?" Silas looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is my home too now. I've worked just as hard as you to keep this place running. I've taken care of your children, your house, everything, and you're telling me you might just sell it all without even asking what I think? Silas's jaw tightened. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. I'm tired, Elena. I'm tired of waking up every morning wondering if this is the day something goes wrong. If this is the day I lose another person I care about because I couldn't keep them safe. His voice broke. I can't do this anymore. Not alone. You're not alone. Aren't I? Silas's eyes were hard. You're here now, yeah. But for how long? Until something better comes along? Until you realize this life is too hard and you leave just like... He stopped, shaking his head. Just like who? Elena demanded. Just like your wife? She didn't leave, Silas. She died. And I'm not her. I know that. Do you? Because it seems like you're so busy protecting yourself from getting hurt again that you can't see what's right in front of you. Silas stared at her, his chest heaving. Then he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. Elena stood there, trembling with anger and hurt. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Rowan standing in the hallway, his face pale. Is Pa really going to sell the ranch? He asked quietly. Elena's throat tightened. I don't know. But this is our home. I know. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. He can't do this. He can't just give up. He's not giving up. He's scared. We're all scared, Rowan's voice cracked. But we don't just run away. Before Elena could respond, Rowan turned and ran to his room, slamming the door. She heard June crying from her room, and Caleb appeared, looking lost. What's happening? He asked. Elena knelt down and pulled him into a hug. It's all right. Everything's going to be all right. But she didn't know if that was true. The next few days were tense. Silas threw himself into work, leaving before dawn and coming back long after dark. He barely spoke to anyone, barely ate. Elena tried to give him space, but the silence was suffocating. The children felt it too. June was clingy, following Elena everywhere. Caleb was quieter than usual, his smiles forced. And Rowan was angry. Elena could see it in the way he moved, in the set of his shoulders, in the way he looked at his father when he thought no one was watching. One evening, Elena was making bread when she heard raised voices from the barn. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to investigate. Inside, she found Rowan and Silas facing each other, both red-faced. You can't do this, Rowan was shouting. You can't just sell our home. It's not your decision to make, Silas said, his voice hard. It's not yours either. This is Ma's home. She's buried here. And you want to just walk away from her? Silas's face went white. Don't you dare! What, tell the truth? That you're a coward? The slap came so fast, Elena almost didn't see it. Silas's hand connected with Rowan's cheek, the sound echoing through the barn. Rowan stumbled back, his hand going to his face, his eyes wide with shock. Silas stared at his own hand, horror spreading across his face. But Rowan was already running. He pushed past Elena and disappeared into the night. Silas stood frozen, his hand still raised, his face stricken. Then he turned and punched the wall so hard the wood cracked. He leaned against it, his shoulders shaking. Elena moved closer. Silas, don't. His voice was broken. Just don't. He didn't mean it. Yes, he did. And he was right. Silas turned to look at her, and there were tears on his face. I'm a coward. I'm running away because I'm too scared to stay and fight, and I just hit my son for telling me the truth. Elena's chest ached. Go find him. Talk to him. And say what? The truth. That you're scared. That you don't know what you're doing. That you're sorry. She paused. That you love him. Silas wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then he nodded and walked out into the night. Elena stood in the barn alone, listening to the sounds of the animals settling. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and took a deep breath. This family was breaking apart, and she didn't know how to stop it. An hour passed. Then 2. Elena put the children to bed, made up a story about where Rowan and Silas had gone. June didn't believe her, Elena could see it in her eyes, but the little girl didn't argue. When the house was finally quiet, Elena sat by the fire and waited. It was past midnight when the door finally opened. Silas came in first, looking exhausted. Behind him was Rowan, his eyes red and swollen. They stood in the doorway, both of them silent. Elena stood. Are you all right? Rowan nodded, not meeting her eyes. Silas put a hand on his son's shoulder, and Rowan didn't pull away. We talked, Silas said quietly. And? And I'm not selling the ranch. Relief flooded through Elena's chest. You're sure? Silas looked at Rowan, then back at her. Yeah, I'm sure. Rowan finally looked up, his eyes meeting Elena's. I'm sorry, for yelling, for everything. Elena crossed the room and pulled him into a hug. He stiffened for a second, then his arms came up around her, holding tight. It's all right, she whispered. You're all right. When she let him go, Rowan wiped his eyes and disappeared to his room without another word. Silas stood by the door, his hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, too, for all of it. For thinking I could just run away and it would be easier. Elena walked over to him. You were scared. That's human. I was stupid. That too. A ghost of a smile crossed Silas's face. Then it faded and he looked at her seriously. I need you to know something. What? When Harrison made me that offer, the first thing I thought wasn't about the money or leaving or any of that. The first thing I thought was whether you'd come with us. He paused. And I realized that somewhere along the way, you stopped being someone I hired and started being someone I need. Elena's breath caught. Silas? I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you the truth. You matter to me, Elena, more than I thought anyone could after Mary died. His voice was rough. And I'm sorry it took almost losing everything to figure that out. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. I'm not going anywhere. I told you that. I know. But I needed to say it anyway. They stood there in the dim light, the fire crackling behind them, the night quiet outside. And for the first time since the stranger had ridden up to the ranch, Elena felt like she could breathe again. Get some sleep, Silas said finally. Tomorrow's a new day. Elena nodded and watched him walk to his room. Then she went to hers, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling. The crisis had passed. The ranch was safe. The family was intact. But something had changed, something fundamental and irreversible, and Elena wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Elena woke early, made breakfast, and watched the children eat with more appetite than they'd had in days. Rowan's cheek was still red where Silas had hit him, but he didn't mention it, and neither did anyone else. Silas came in from the barn, and for the first time in a week, he looked at his children and smiled. Who wants to help me fix the fence in the north pasture? He asked. Me! Caleb's hand shot up. Me too, Rowan said quietly. Silas nodded. All right, get your coats. The boys scrambled off, and June tugged on Elena's skirt. Can we make cookies? If you help me clean up after. I will, I promise. Elena smiled and ruffled June's hair. The little girl ran off to get the flour, and Elena started clearing the table. Silas lingered by the door. Thank you. For what? For staying, for not giving up on us when you had every reason to. Elena looked at him. I don't give up easy. I've noticed. He left, and Elena went back to work, feeling lighter than she had in days. But that lightness wouldn't last, because later that afternoon, while Elena was hanging laundry, she heard Silas talking to someone in the barn. She moved closer, trying not to eavesdrop, but unable to stop herself. She's good with the children, a man's voice said. Elena recognized it. Harrison, the man who'd wanted to buy the ranch. But you need to be careful, Boone. People talk. About what? Silas's voice was cold. About you bringing in some girl nobody knows and having her live here. It doesn't look right. I don't care how it looks. Maybe you should. For your children's sake, if nothing else. There was a long pause, then Silas's voice dangerous and low. Get off my property. I'm just trying to help. Now! Elena heard footsteps, then the sound of a horse riding away. She stayed where she was, her hands frozen on the wet fabric in the basket. People were talking. About her. About Silas. About what it meant for her to be living here. And suddenly, Elena realized that no matter what Silas felt or what she felt, the world outside this ranch saw her as something else entirely. Not family, not help. Just a woman living in a man's house without a ring on her finger. And in Wyoming, in 1878, that was enough to ruin both of them. Elena's hands stayed frozen on the laundry, the wet fabric heavy and cold against her fingers. Harrison's words echoed in her head, each one landing like a stone. People were talking. Of course they were. She'd been naive to think otherwise. She forced herself to finish hanging the clothes, her movements mechanical. When the basket was empty, she stood there for a moment, staring at nothing, before walking back to the house. Inside, June was playing with her doll by the fire, humming a tuneless song. "Mama Elena, can we make the cookies now?" Elena blinked, pulling herself back to the present. "What? Oh, yes. Let me just—" She stopped, her throat tight. "Give me a few minutes, sweetheart." June nodded and went back to her playing. Elena walked to her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap, and tried to think. What Harrison had said wasn't wrong. Not technically. She was living in Silas's house, unmarried, with no blood relation to the family. In towns like theirs, that was enough to make people whisper, enough to make them wonder, enough to damage Silas's reputation and, more importantly, the children's futures. The door opened without warning. Silas stood in the doorway, his jaw set, his eyes hard. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. Silas stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Don't listen to him. Harrison's a fool who doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut." "He's not wrong, though." "He is wrong. What happens on my land is my business and nobody else's." "That's not how the world works, Silas. You know that." Elena stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "People will talk. They probably already are. And it's not just you they'll hurt. It's the children. Rowan, Caleb, June. They'll hear things. At church, in town, from other kids. They'll be judged for something they didn't do." Silas's expression darkened. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe Harrison has a point. Maybe I shouldn't be here." "Don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't even think that." "What else am I supposed to think?" Elena's voice rose. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Because I was bought like property, and this was the only option I had. But now things are different, and people are noticing, and I can't let my being here hurt your family." Silas crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her shoulders. "You are part of this family. Not in the eyes of the law, not in the eyes of anyone who matters. You matter to me." His grip tightened. "You matter to the children. That's all that counts." Elena looked up at him, her eyes burning. "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm nothing more than a scandal waiting to happen." Silas's face twisted with something between anger and pain. He let go of her shoulders and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to do? Marry you? Would that fix it? Would that make people stop talking?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. "Is that what you think this is about?" she asked quietly. "Me trying to trap you into marriage?" "No, that's not—" Silas shook his head. "I don't know what I'm saying anymore." "Then maybe you should figure it out before you say anything else." Elena walked past him and out the door, her chest tight with anger and hurt. She went to the kitchen where June was still waiting and somehow managed to smile. "All right, sweetheart, let's make those cookies." They worked in silence, June chattering about nothing while Elena measured flour and sugar with shaking hands. By the time the cookies were in the oven, Silas had left the house. Elena saw him through the window, walking toward the far pasture, his shoulders rigid. That evening, dinner was strained. Silas barely looked at her. The children sensed something was wrong and ate quickly, escaping to their rooms as soon as they could. When the dishes were done, Elena sat by the fire alone, staring into the flames. She'd been foolish to think this could work, foolish to believe she could build a life here without consequences. The world didn't care about what was fair or right. It cared about appearances, about rules, about keeping everyone in their proper place. And Elena's place, apparently, was nowhere. The next morning, she woke before dawn with a decision made. She packed her canvas bag quietly, taking only what she'd arrived with. The wooden bird Rowan had carved sat on the windowsill, and she hesitated before leaving it there. It belonged to this place, to this family, not to her. She wrote a note, her hand cramping as she forced the words onto paper. It wasn't long, just enough to explain. She left it on the kitchen table, weighted down with a cup. Then she put on her coat, picked up her bag, and walked out the door. The morning was cold and gray, the sky threatening rain. Elena didn't look back at the house. If she did, she knew she wouldn't be able to leave. She walked toward town, her boots crunching on the gravel road. The prairie stretched out on either side of her, endless and empty. The wind picked up, cutting through her coat, but she kept walking. She'd made it about 2 miles when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Elena's stomach dropped. She kept walking, faster now, but the horse was gaining. A moment later, Silas pulled up alongside her, his face thunderous. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Elena didn't stop. "Walking." "Get on the horse." "No." Silas dismounted and grabbed her arm, spinning her to face him. "You're leaving, just like that? Without even talking to me? There's nothing to talk about." Elena tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. "I left you a note," I explained. "I don't give a damn about your note," his voice cracked. "You can't just leave." "Why not? You said it yourself last night. What am I to you, really? Just hired help? Someone who takes care of your children and keeps your house? That's all this ever was, wasn't it?" Silas's face went pale. "You know that's not true." "Do I?" "Because you've never actually said otherwise. You've never told me what I am to you, Silas. You've hinted and implied and danced around it, but you've never actually said it." Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "And I'm tired of guessing. I'm tired of wondering if I matter or if I'm just convenient, so I'm leaving. I'm making it easy for you." "You're not making anything easy. You're running away." "I'm protecting your family." "By abandoning them?" Silas's voice was raw. "June calls you Mama. Caleb follows you around like a puppy. Rowan carved you that bird because for the first time since his mother died, he felt like someone saw him." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "And you're just going to walk away from all of that because some bastard said people might talk?" Elena's composure cracked. "It's not just talk, Silas. It's their futures. Do you know what happens to children whose father keeps an unmarried woman in his house? They get shunned. They get treated like they're dirty. June won't be invited to play with other girls. Rowan and Caleb will get into fights defending your honor and mine. And for what? So I can stay in a place where I don't belong?" "You do belong." Silas's hands moved to her shoulders, gripping tight. "You belong here more than anyone. This house was dead before you came. We were all just going through the motions, waiting for something to change, and then you showed up and you brought us back to life. That doesn't change what people will say. Then we'll give them something else to talk about." Silas's jaw set. "Marry me." Elena froze. "What?" "Marry me. For real. Not because you have to, not because of what people might say, but because I'm asking you to." His voice softened. "Because I want you to stay. Because my children need you. Because I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Because I need you." Elena stared at him, her heart racing. "You don't mean that." "I do." "You're just saying it because you're afraid I'll leave." "I'm afraid you'll leave, but that's not why I'm asking." Silas's hands moved from her shoulders to her face, cupping it gently. "I've been a coward, Elena. I've been so scared of betraying Mary's memory that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. But you were right when you said loving her doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me human, and so does this. Silas, I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And I'm asking you to stay. Not as hired help, not as a convenience, as my wife." Elena's tears finally spilled over. "You don't have to do this." "I know. I want to." "People will still talk." "Let them." Silas's thumb brushed away her tears. "I don't care anymore. The only thing I care about is you. Say yes, Elena. Please." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the fear in his eyes and the hope, at the man who'd been carrying so much weight for so long he'd almost broken under it, at the father who loved his children enough to ask for help, at the person who'd finally let himself feel something again. "Yes," she whispered. Silas's eyes closed, his shoulders sagging with relief. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "Thank you," he said against her hair. "Thank you." Elena held him back, her face buried in his chest, her bag forgotten on the ground beside them. The wind blew cold across the prairie, but she barely felt it. They rode back to the ranch together, Elena sitting behind Silas on the horse, her arms around his waist. When they got close enough to see the house, she saw 3 small figures standing on the porch. The children. Rowan's face was pale, his eyes red. Caleb was crying openly, and June broke away from her brothers and ran toward them, her little legs pumping. "Mama Elena! Mama Elena! You came back!" Silas pulled the horse to a stop, and Elena slid down, catching June as she threw herself into her arms. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." June buried her face in Elena's neck, her small body shaking with sobs. Caleb ran up next, wrapping his arms around both of them. Even Rowan approached, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes were wet. "You were really leaving?" he asked quietly. Elena looked at him. "I thought it was the right thing to do." "It wasn't." "I know that now." Rowan's jaw worked. Then he stepped forward and hugged her, quick and fierce, before pulling away and wiping his eyes on his sleeve. Silas dismounted and put his hand on Elena's shoulder. "Children, I have something to tell you." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "I've asked Elena to marry me, and she said yes." June's face lit up like the sun. "Really? You're going to be our real mama?" Elena's throat tightened. "If you'll have me." "Yes!" June jumped up and down. "Yes! Yes, yes!" Caleb grinned wide. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" "Forever," Elena confirmed. Rowan was quiet, his eyes moving between Elena and his father. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. "About time, Pa." Silas huffed a laugh, and suddenly they were all laughing, the sound spilling out into the cold morning air. That night, after the children were finally in bed, too excited to sleep but forced to try anyway, Elena and Silas sat by the fire. He poured 2 small glasses of whiskey and handed her one. "To new beginnings," he said. Elena clinked her glass against his. "To second chances." They drank, and Elena set her glass aside. "When should we do it? The wedding, I mean." "Soon, before I lose my nerve." "You won't lose your nerve?" "You don't know that." Silas smiled, but there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I haven't done this in a long time, and the first time I was barely old enough to know what I was doing. We'll figure it out together." Silas reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. "I need you to know something. This isn't just about propriety or what people think. It's not even just about the children, though they love you and need you." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "It's about me. About the fact that somewhere along the way, you became the person I think about first thing in the morning and last thing at night. The person I want to talk to when something good happens. The person I look for when I come in from the fields." His voice dropped. "You became my home, Elena, and I don't want to lose that." Elena's chest ached with something too big to name. She squeezed his hand. "You won't, I promise." They sat in silence for a while, hands joined, the fire burning low. And for the first time in months, Elena felt like she could breathe without the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday. It would be small, just the family and a few witnesses from town. Silas rode into town the next day to speak with the minister and file the necessary papers. Elena stayed home with the children, trying to focus on regular chores while June peppered her with questions about dresses and flowers and whether there would be cake. "We don't have much money for those things," Elena said gently. "It'll be simple." "I don't care," June said, hugging her around the waist. "I just want you to be my real mama." Elena's eyes burned. "I already am, sweetheart. The wedding just makes it official." When Silas returned that evening, he was carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Elena without a word. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple dress, pale blue, with delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't new, but it was beautiful. "Where did you get this?" Elena asked, her voice soft. "The general store. Mrs. Patterson said it came in on the last shipment and nobody had claimed it yet." Silas shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "I know it's not much, but I thought, for the wedding..." Elena held the dress up, her fingers trembling. "It's perfect." Relief crossed Silas's face. Yeah. That night, Elena tried the dress on in her room. It fit well enough. a little loose in the waist, but nothing she couldn't fix with a few stitches. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked hopeful. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Elena cleaned the house from top to bottom. Rowan and Caleb helped Silas repair the porch and paint the front door. June picked wildflowers and tied them into small bouquets, insisting they be placed on every surface. On Friday night, the night before the wedding, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow, her life would change in a way she'd never imagined. Tomorrow, she would become Silas Boone's wife, a mother to his children, a permanent part of this family. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Come in." The door opened and Rowan stepped inside, holding something in his hands. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course." He sat on the edge of her bed, his hands clasped around whatever he was holding. In the dim light, Elena couldn't see what it was. "I wanted to give you something," Rowan said quietly, "before tomorrow." He held out his hands, and Elena saw it. A wooden box, small and carefully carved, with flowers etched into the lid. "Rowan, this is beautiful." "It was my mother's." His voice was tight. "Pa gave it to her when they got married. She kept her wedding ring in it, and some other things. Letters, mostly. After she died, Pa put it away. I found it a few months ago." Elena's breath caught. "You should keep this, or your father should." "No." Rowan looked at her, his eyes serious. "I want you to have it. I talked to Pa about it, and he said it was my choice, and I choose to give it to you." "Rowan, this adikats mamri." "You're not replacing her," he said, his voice firm. "I know that. I think I always knew it, but I was too angry to admit it. You're not trying to be her. You're just you. And that's enough." He paused. "More than enough." Elena's vision blurred with tears. She took the box carefully, holding it like it might break. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Rowan nodded. Then awkwardly he leaned forward and hugged her. "I'm glad you're staying," he whispered. "Me too." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena opened the box and found a simple gold band inside, along with a few folded letters. She didn't read them. They weren't hers to read. But she held the ring up to the light, watching it catch the glow from her window. Tomorrow she would wear this ring. Tomorrow she would stand beside Silas and make promises that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. And for the first time since her parents died, Elena Cross felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant blue. Elena woke early, her stomach tight with nerves. She dressed carefully in the blue dress, pinning her hair up and letting a few strands fall loose around her face. She had no makeup, no jewelry except for the ring she would soon wear. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who looked almost pretty, someone who looked like a bride. A knock on the door. "Elena, you ready?" Silas's voice rough with emotion. "Almost." She took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and opened the door. Silas stood in the hallway, dressed in his best clothes, dark pants, a clean white shirt, a vest that looked like it had been aired out and brushed. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked nervous and young and handsome. When he saw her, his breath caught. "You look—" "I know it's not much," Elena said quickly, "but it's the best I could—" "Beautiful," Silas finished. "You look beautiful." Elena's cheeks flushed. "Thank you." They walked out together to find the children waiting by the door, all dressed in their Sunday best. June wore a yellow dress that had been carefully mended, her hair in two neat braids. Caleb's shirt was buttoned all the way up, his hair slicked back. Rowan wore clothes that were almost too small for him now, but he stood tall and proud. "Ready?" Silas asked them. "Ready!" they chorused. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town. The minister was an older man with kind eyes who spoke simply and clearly. There were only a handful of witnesses: Mrs. Patterson from the general store, the blacksmith and his wife, a few neighboring ranchers, and Harrison standing in the back, his expression unreadable. Elena tried not to look at him. She focused instead on Silas, on the way his hand trembled slightly when he took hers, on the way his voice cracked when he said his vows. I, Silas Boone, take you, Elena Cross, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Elena's voice was steadier than she expected when she repeated the words back to him. I, Elena Cross, take you, Silas Boone, Sempoatan, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Silas slipped the gold band onto her finger. It fit perfectly. You may kiss the bride, the minister said, smiling. Silas hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Then he leaned in and kissed her, gentle and brief, but real. When they pulled apart, June was clapping and crying at the same time. Caleb grinned so wide it looked like his face might split. Even Rowan was smiling, his eyes bright. They were married. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson insisted they come to her house for a small meal. There was bread and cheese, cold chicken, apple pie. It wasn't fancy, but it was generous, and Elena found herself grateful for the woman's kindness. As they were leaving, Harrison approached. Elena tensed, but Silas put a hand on her back, steady and reassuring. Congratulations, Harrison said, tipping his hat. I hope you'll both be very happy. There was something in his tone that made Elena's skin prickle, but Silas just nodded. Thank you. They rode home in the wagon, the children piled in the back, laughing and teasing each other. Silas drove with one hand, the other resting on Elena's knee. She covered it with her own, and he glanced at her, a small smile on his face. You all right? He asked. Yeah, you? Yeah. When they reached the ranch, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house looked warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney. Home. That night, after the children were in bed, Elena and Silas stood together in the main room. The house was quiet, peaceful. So, Silas said, we're married. We are. Feels strange, Elena laughed softly. It does. Silas moved closer, his hands finding her waist. Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for all of it. Elena looked up at him. Thank you for asking. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. When they pulled apart, Elena's heart was racing. We should probably figure out the sleeping arrangements, Silas said, his voice rough. I mean, you're my wife now. It wouldn't be proper for us to... Silas. Yeah? Stop thinking so much. He laughed, a real laugh, and pulled her close. Yes, ma'am. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, neither speaking. Outside, the wind blew gentle across the prairie. Inside, the fire crackled low. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt right. But peace, Elena had learned, was a temporary thing. And just when she thought they'd finally found it, the world would remind her that survival was never guaranteed. 3 days after the wedding, disaster struck. It started with a storm. Not the gentle spring rains they'd been having, but something violent and sudden. The sky turned black in the middle of the afternoon, and the wind picked up so fast it tore shingles off the roof. Get the children inside, Silas shouted over the roar of the wind. Now! Elena grabbed June and ran for the house. Rowan and Caleb followed, their faces pale with fear. Inside, the walls shook, and dust fell from the ceiling. Where's Pa? Caleb asked, his voice shaking. He's getting the animals secured, Elena said, trying to sound calm. He'll be back soon. But an hour passed, and Silas didn't return. The storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows, thunder shaking the foundation. Elena kept the children close, singing to June to keep her calm, holding Caleb when he started to cry. Rowan stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. I should go help him. No, Elena said firmly. You stay here. But Pa, your father can take care of himself. I need you here with me. Rowan's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Another hour passed. Then another. The storm finally began to ease, the wind dying down, the rain slowing to a drizzle. And still, Silas didn't come back. Elena's stomach twisted with fear. She stood and walked to the door, peering out into the darkness. I'm going to find him, she said. I'm coming with you, Rowan said immediately. No, I need you to stay with Caleb and June.
Elena, please, Rowan. I need to know they're safe. Can you do that for me? Rowan's face struggled between duty and fear. Finally, he nodded. Be careful. Elena pulled on her coat and stepped out into the mud. The yard was a mess. Branches everywhere, the chicken coop partially collapsed, debris scattered across the ground.
Silas, she called. Silas! No answer. She made her way toward the barn, her boots sinking into the mud with every step. When she pushed open the barn door, her heart stopped. Silas was on the ground, pinned beneath a fallen beam. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Silas! Elena ran to him, dropping to her knees. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open. Elena, don't move. I'm going to get you out. The beam, too heavy. I don't care. Elena stood and grabbed the beam, pulling with all her strength. It didn't budge. She tried again and again. Her hands were bleeding, her muscles screaming, but she didn't stop. Finally, the beam shifted, just an inch, but enough. Elena wedged a piece of wood underneath it and pulled Silas out, dragging him clear. Can you stand? She asked. I think my leg. Elena looked down and saw blood soaking through his pants. Her stomach lurched, but she forced herself to stay calm. All right, I'm going to get you to the house. Put your arm around me. Together, they stumbled through the mud, Silas leaning heavily on her, his breathing ragged. By the time they reached the house, Elena's shoulders were on fire and her vision was blurring. Rowan threw open the door, his eyes going wide. Pa! Help me get him to the bed, Elena said. They carried Silas to his room and laid him down carefully. Elena cut away his pant leg and examined the wound. It was deep, bleeding heavily, but she didn't think the bone was broken. Rowan, get me clean cloth and water. Caleb, stoke the fire. June, stay out of the way. The children scattered, and Elena got to work. She cleaned the wound as best she could, stitched it closed with trembling hands, and wrapped it tight. Silas gritted his teeth through it all, his face gray with pain. When she was finished, he grabbed her hand. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet. We need to watch for infection. She stayed by his side all night, changing the bandages, checking his temperature, forcing water down his throat when he tried to refuse it. The children hovered nearby, scared and quiet. By morning, the fever started. Elena fought it the way she'd fought June's fever months before, with cool cloths and constant vigilance and sheer refusal to let him go. For 3 days, Silas burned. For 3 days, Elena barely slept. On the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Silas opened his eyes, clear and focused, and looked at her. You're still here. Where else would I be? You should be resting. You look terrible. Elena laughed, exhausted. Thanks. I mean it. When's the last time you slept? I don't remember. Silas tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. The ranch is fine. Rowan's been handling things. He's been amazing. And the children? Scared, but okay. Silas closed his eyes. I thought I was going to die out there. You didn't. Only because of you. Elena squeezed his hand. We take care of each other. That's what family does. Silas's eyes opened again, and there was something in them Elena hadn't seen before. Not just gratitude, not just relief. Love. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. He smiled, weak but real. Good. Elena leaned down and kissed his forehead. Then she finally let herself sleep, curled up in the chair beside his bed, her hand still holding his. Silas's recovery was slow. The wound healed cleaner than Elena had dared hope, but the leg remained weak, and he couldn't put his full weight on it for weeks. He hated it, hated being confined to the house, hated watching his children and wife do the work he believed was his responsibility. Elena could see the frustration eating at him, the way his jaw would tighten every time Rowan came in from the fields, or she lifted something heavy. You're pushing yourself too hard, she told him one afternoon when she caught him trying to walk to the barn without his crutch. I'm fine. You're limping. I said I'm fine. His voice was sharp, and immediately he winced, not from pain, but from regret. I'm sorry, I need to be useful. Elena set down the basket of laundry she'd been carrying and walked over to him. You are useful. You're healing. That's what you need to be doing right now. The ranch doesn't run on healing. No, but it runs on all of us. Rowan's handling the animals. Caleb's keeping the chicken coop repaired. I'm managing the house and the garden. We're doing this together, Silas. That's what you taught us. He looked at her, and some of the tension in his shoulders eased. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. That got a small smile out of him. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. Thank you for everything, for keeping this place running while I've been useless. You're not useless. You're hurt. There's a difference. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist despite the awkward angle. I love you. You know that? The words still caught her off guard, even though he'd said them before. They felt too big, too impossible for someone who'd spent most of her life being told she didn't matter. I know, she said softly. I love you too. By late May, Silas was walking without the crutch, though he still favored his good leg. The ranch had survived the storm and his injury, but just barely. There was damage everywhere. Fences that needed mending, the barn roof that leaked, the chicken coop that Caleb had patched but wouldn't last another season. They worked together to fix what they could, but money was tight, tighter than Elena had realized. One night, after the children were asleep, she found Silas sitting at the table with a ledger open in front of him, his head in his hands. How bad is it? She asked, sitting down beside him. He didn't look up. Bad enough. Elena reached for the ledger and scanned the numbers. Her stomach sank. They were in debt. Not crushing debt, but enough to keep them struggling. The storm had cost them 2 cows and most of their spring planting. The medical supplies for Silas's leg had eaten into their savings, and now, with repairs needed everywhere, they were running out of options. We'll figure it out, Elena said, though she wasn't sure how. Silas finally looked at her. I should have taken Harrison's offer when I had the chance. Don't say that. It's true. I let pride get in the way of good sense, and now we're paying for it. Elena closed the ledger and took his hands. We're not selling. We'll find another way. What way? We can't squeeze blood from a stone, Elena. Then we get creative. She paused, thinking. What if we sold some of the livestock, not the breeding stock, but the young ones? And I could take in sewing work from town. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that people are always looking for someone who can mend clothes properly. Silas frowned. You're already doing too much. So are you. So are the children. That's what it takes sometimes. She squeezed his hands. We're in this together, remember? That means we share the burden. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. We'll try it your way. The next week, Elena rode into town with Caleb and a basket of mending she'd finished for Mrs. Patterson. The woman paid her fair wages and immediately asked if she could take on more work. Elena agreed, and by the time they left, she had commitments for 3 more families. On the way home, Caleb was unusually quiet. Elena glanced at him. You all right? Are we poor? He asked. The question was so direct, so childlike, that Elena didn't know how to answer at first. We're struggling right now, she said carefully, but that doesn't mean we're poor. We have a home, food on the table, each other. That's more than a lot of people have. But Pa's worried. I can see it. Your father worries because he cares. That's what good fathers do. Elena reached over and ruffled his hair. But we're going to be all right. I promise. Caleb nodded, but he didn't look convinced. That night, Elena lay in bed beside Silas, staring at the ceiling. They'd moved into the same room after the wedding, though it had taken them both a while to get comfortable with the intimacy of it. Now she listened to his breathing and felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. You awake? Silas asked quietly. Yeah. Me too. He rolled onto his side to face her. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. She turned her head to look at him. Caleb asked me today if we're poor. Silas's expression darkened. What did you tell him? That we're struggling, but we'll be all right. Do you believe that? Elena was quiet for a moment. I have to, because if I don't, what's the point of any of this? Silas reached for her hand. You're right. We'll figure it out. They lay there in silence, fingers intertwined, until sleep finally came. June came in early, and with it came hope. The garden Elena had planted started to produce, first lettuce and radishes, then peas and carrots. The livestock they hadn't sold began breeding, adding to their numbers. And the sewing work kept coming, steady and reliable. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The debt started to shrink, slowly but surely. One afternoon in mid-June, Elena was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approaching. She turned to see a familiar figure riding up, Thomas Ridley. Her blood went cold. Ridley dismounted, tipping his hat like they were old friends. "Elena, you're looking well." She didn't move. "What do you want?" "Is that any way to greet your guardian?" "You stopped being my guardian the day you sold me." Ridley's smile faltered. "I heard you got married. Congratulations. Seems like things worked out for you after all." "No thanks to you." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "Look, I know we didn't part on the best terms, but I wanted to come by and, well, to apologize." Elena stared at him. "Apologize?" "I was in a bad spot financially. I made decisions I'm not proud of. And I wanted you to know that I regret how things ended between us."
"You regret it." Elena's voice was flat. "You sold me to a stranger for $50, and now you regret it." "I was desperate. So was I. I was 19 years old with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and you handed me over like I was livestock." Her voice rose, all the anger she'd buried for months finally breaking free. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? To know that the person who was supposed to take care of me valued me at $50?
Ridley's face reddened. "I'm trying to make amends. I don't want your amends. I don't want your apology. I want you to leave." "Elena, now." The door to the house opened and Silas stepped out, his hand resting on the rifle he carried. "You heard her." Ridley looked between them, his expression hardening. "Fine. But you should know, I could have sold you to someone worse. I did you a favor, putting you with a decent man."
"You did yourself a favor," Elena said coldly. "And you want credit for not doing something even more terrible than what you did." "Well, you're not getting it. Not from me." Ridley's jaw clenched. He climbed back onto his horse and looked down at her one last time. "I hope you find it in your heart to forgive me someday." "I might," Elena said, "but I'll never forget." He rode off and Elena stood there shaking. Silas came up beside her and put his hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, I think I am." She looked up at him. "Is it wrong that I feel relieved? That I got to say all of that to his face?" "No, I think you needed to." Elena leaned into him, and they stood together watching the dust settle on the road. "He was right about one thing," Silas said after a while. "What's that?" "He could have sold you to someone worse, and I'm damn grateful he didn't." Elena smiled despite everything. "Me too." The summer passed in a blur of work and small victories. The garden flourished, the livestock multiplied. The debt continued to shrink. And slowly, carefully, the Boone Ranch started to feel less like a place they were barely holding on to and more like a place they were building together. The children grew. Rowan shot up another few inches, and his voice deepened. He worked alongside Silas now, not as a boy trying to prove himself, but as a young man who knew his worth. Caleb became the unofficial mechanic of the ranch, fixing everything from wagon wheels to broken tools with a skill that surprised everyone. And June blossomed. She followed Elena everywhere, learning to cook and sew and garden, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. One evening in late July, Elena stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Silas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It is." "You know what else is beautiful?" "What?" "The fact that we made it. We actually made it." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "We did, and we're going to keep making it." Silas kissed her, slow and deep, and for a moment, everything else fell away. Then June's voice called from inside. "Mama, Caleb put a frog in my bed." "Did not." "Did too." Elena sighed and pulled away. "Duty calls." Silas laughed. "Welcome to married life." But the peace they'd fought so hard to build was tested again in August. It started with a letter. Silas came back from town one afternoon with an envelope, his face grim. He handed it to Elena without a word. She opened it and read. It was from a lawyer in Cheyenne, informing them that Harrison had filed a claim disputing the boundary lines of their property. According to the letter, Harrison believed that a portion of the Boone Ranch, the section with the best grazing land, actually belonged to his property,
and he was taking legal action to reclaim it. "He's trying to take our land," Elena said, her voice hollow. "Part of it, yeah." "Can he do that?" "If he can prove his claim, yeah, he can." Silas took the letter back and stared at it. "We need to hire a lawyer, fight this properly." "With what money?" Silas's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but we can't just let him steal our land." Elena's mind raced. They just started to get ahead, just started to breathe a little easier. And now this. "What if we talk to him?" she suggested. "Before we spend money we don't have on lawyers, what if we just tried to settle this between us?"
"Harrison's not interested in settling. He wants the land." "Then we make him interested. We find out what he really wants and see if there's a way to give it to him without losing what we need." Silas looked skeptical, but he nodded. "All right, we'll try it your way." They rode to Harrison's ranch the next day, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson. Harrison's property was larger than theirs, more prosperous looking. The house was bigger, the fences newer, the livestock healthier. Harrison met them in his yard, his expression neutral. "Boone, Mrs. Boone, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "We got your letter," Silas said. "We want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. The land is mine according to the original survey. I have documents to prove it." "Then show us," Elena said. "Show us these documents." Harrison hesitated, then gestured toward the house. "Come inside."
They followed him into a well-appointed parlor. He pulled out a folder and spread papers across the table. Old maps, survey records, deeds. Elena studied them carefully, trying to make sense of the lines and measurements. "Here," Harrison said, pointing to a section. "This shows that the boundary was set at the creek, not the fence line. Your husband has been grazing his cattle on my land for years." Silas's face darkened. "That fence has been there since before I bought this place. My father-in-law put it up 30 years ago." "Then your father-in-law was wrong. Or your survey is." The two men glared at each other, and Elena could feel the tension crackling in the air. "What do you really want, Harrison?" she asked quietly. He turned to her, surprised. "What? This isn't really about the land, is it? You have more property than you can use, so what do you really want?" Harrison's expression shifted. For a moment, he looked almost uncomfortable. Then he sat down and sighed. "Access," he said finally. "The creek runs through that section. I need water rights for my cattle, especially during the dry season. Your fence blocks me from the best access point." Elena looked at Silas. "What if we gave you access to the creek without giving you the land?" Silas frowned. "What do you mean? What if we agreed to let Harrison's cattle water at the creek during dry season, and in exchange, he drops the claim?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, considering. "And what do you get out of it?" "We keep our land. You get what you actually need, and neither of us has to spend money on lawyers we can't afford." Harrison studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Silas. "Your wife's smarter than you are, Boone." "I know." Harrison laughed, short and sharp. "All right. I'll agree to those terms, but I want it in writing." "So do we," Elena said. They shook hands, and Elena felt the weight on her chest lift slightly. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a solution, and sometimes that was enough. On the ride home, Silas was quiet. Finally, he said, "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That he'd agree. That it wasn't really about the land." Elena shrugged. "I didn't, not for sure. But people usually want something specific, even when they're asking for something else. You just have to figure out what it is." Silas reached over and took her hand. "You saved us again." "We saved us, together." September brought the first hints of fall. Cooler nights, leaves starting to turn, the harvest coming in. Elena and the children worked to preserve everything they could, canning vegetables, drying herbs, storing potatoes and carrots in the root cellar. One afternoon, Rowan came to Elena while she was working in the garden. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Can I talk to you about something?" he asked. "Of course." He glanced around to make sure they were alone. "I've been thinking about what I want to do. After I'm older, I mean." "All right. Pa expects me to take over the ranch someday, and I will if that's what's needed, but I don't know if it's what I want." Elena set down her trowel and gave him her full attention. "What do you want?" Rowan's face flushed. "There's a man in town, a carpenter. He does beautiful work, cabinets, furniture, all kinds of things. And he said if I wanted, he could teach me. Not as an apprentice exactly, but enough to know if I'm any good at it. And you want to try? Yeah. But I don't want Pa to think I'm abandoning the ranch, or that I don't appreciate everything he's done. Elena reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Your father wants you to be happy. That's all any parent wants. And if being happy means learning carpentry, then that's what you should do. You really think he'll understand? I know he will, because I'll make sure of it. That night, after dinner, Elena brought up Rowan's interest in carpentry. Silas listened, his expression unreadable. Is this what you want? He asked Rowan. The boy nodded. Yes, sir. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My father wanted me to be a rancher, never asked what I wanted, just assumed. He looked at his son. I won't make that mistake. If you want to learn carpentry, learn carpentry. The ranch will still be here if you decide to come back to it. Rowan's face lit up. Really? Really? The boy stood and hugged his father, quick and fierce. Silas hugged him back, his eyes bright with emotion. Elena watched them and felt her heart swell. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden light. The ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. The debt was nearly gone. The fences were mended, the barn roof patched, the animals healthy. They still had to work hard, still had to watch every penny, but the desperate edge was gone. One evening, Silas suggested they take a walk. They left the children at the house and walked out to the old cottonwood where Mary was buried. The sun was setting, painting the world in soft colors. Silas stood in front of the grave, his hands in his pockets. I haven't been here in a while, he said quietly. Felt wrong, somehow, like I was betraying her by being happy with someone else. Elena stood beside him, not touching, just present. But I've been thinking, Silas continued, about what it means to move forward, and I realized she wouldn't want me stuck in the past. She'd want me to live, to be happy, to give our children a full life, not half a life haunted by grief. He looked at Elena. She'd want me to love you. I really believe that. Elena's eyes burned with tears. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. And that's why this works. You're not trying to be her. You're just being you. And that's enough. More than enough. They stood there in the fading light, hand in hand, and Elena felt like something had finally settled into place. The past and the present weren't fighting anymore. They were just existing, side by side, making room for each other. I want to plant a tree, Elena said suddenly, right here, next to Mary's, not to replace the cottonwood, but to grow alongside it. Silas looked at her. Why? Because that's what we're doing, isn't it? Growing alongside the past instead of trying to erase it. Building something new that honors what came before. Silas's face softened. Yeah, let's do that. The next day they rode into town and bought a young sapling, an oak, strong and long-lived. Together with the children, they planted it beside the cottonwood, patting the earth down carefully and watering it well. What's this for? June asked. For the future, Elena said, so that someday, when you're all grown up and have children of your own, they can sit under this tree and remember where they came from. Rowan knelt and touched the small trunk. I like that. They all stood there together, 6 people bound by choice and love and hard-won commitment, and watched the sun set over the prairie. November brought the first snow. Not the brutal, punishing storms of the previous year, but gentle flurries that dusted the ground and melted by afternoon. Elena stood at the window one morning, watching the flakes fall, and marveled at how different everything felt. A year ago, she'd been standing in a boarding house in town, waiting to be handed over to a stranger, scared, alone, convinced her life was over. Now she was standing in her own home, surrounded by people she loved, building a future she'd never imagined possible. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, coming up behind her. How much has changed? Good change or bad change? Elena turned and wrapped her arms around him. The best kind of change. He kissed the top of her head. I never thanked you properly. For what? For walking into that blizzard. For making me chase after you. For forcing me to say out loud what I was too scared to admit. He pulled back to look at her. If you hadn't left that day, I might have spent the rest of my life hiding from how I felt. And I would have lost you. You didn't lose me. No, because you were brave enough for both of us. Elena smiled. I don't know about brave. I was terrified. Brave and terrified aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing. December arrived, and with it came preparations for Christmas. This year was different. This year, there was laughter in the house, plans being made, secrets being whispered. June insisted on decorating, and Rowan spent evenings carving small wooden ornaments. Caleb and Silas cut down a small pine tree and dragged it into the house, where it filled the room with the smell of winter. Elena made a special dinner: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie that Caleb declared the best thing he'd ever eaten. They sat around the table together, talking and laughing, and Elena looked at each face and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, Silas stood and cleared his throat. I have something to say. The children quieted, looking at him. This past year has been the hardest of my life in some ways, and in other ways, it's been the best. He looked at Elena. A year ago, I brought Elena here because I needed help, because I was desperate and out of options. But she didn't just help. She changed everything. She brought this family back to life. Silas, Elena started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. You taught me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone you lost, that there's room in a heart for both grief and joy, that family isn't just blood, it's choice, his voice cracked. And I choose you. Every day, I choose you. Elena stood and crossed to him, taking his hands. And I choose you, all of you. June jumped up and wrapped her arms around both of them. Then Caleb joined, then Rowan, until they were all tangled together in a messy, perfect hug. That night, after the children were asleep, Elena and Silas lay in bed talking. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Ridley hadn't sold you to me? Silas asked. Sometimes, but not as much as I used to. What do you think would have happened? Elena was quiet for a moment. I think I would have survived. I'm good at that. But I don't think I would have lived. Not really. Not the way I'm living now. What's the difference? Surviving is just getting through each day. Living is finding reasons to wake up in the morning. People who make you laugh. Work that matters. A place that feels like home. She rolled onto her side to face him. You gave me that. All of you did. Silas kissed her, soft and slow. We gave each other that. The winter was mild and the ranch thrived. Rowan started working with the carpenter in town twice a week and came home with stories about joints and grain patterns and how wood could be shaped into something beautiful. Caleb found a wounded hawk and nursed it back to health, keeping it in a makeshift cage until it was strong enough to fly. June learned to read full sentences and insisted on reading to everyone at dinner. And Elena learned what it meant to be happy. Not perfect, not without struggle, but happy in a deep, sustainable way. In February, on a clear, cold day, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on her stomach, trying to process what it meant. A baby. Her and Silas's baby. A new life that would be born into this family they'd built from nothing. She was terrified and thrilled, and everything in between. When she told Silas that night, he went very still. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. Are you happy? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears on his face. I'm everything, happy, scared, grateful, all of it. Me too. They told the children the next day. June squealed and immediately started planning what they'd name the baby. Caleb looked confused but pleased. Rowan grinned and said, About time. What's that supposed to mean? Silas asked. Nothing, just I'm happy for you, both of you. The months passed. Spring came again, bringing new growth and new possibilities. Elena's belly swelled, and she felt the baby move inside her. Tiny flutters at first, then stronger kicks. Silas was constantly hovering, trying to help with everything until Elena finally had to tell him to back off. I'm pregnant, not dying, she said, exasperated. I know. I just want to make sure you're all right. I'm fine. Better than fine. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Feel that? He did. A strong kick right against his palm. His eyes went wide. That's our baby. That's our baby. In late August, Elena went into labor. It was fast and hard and terrifying, but when it was over, she was holding a tiny, perfect baby boy.
He had dark hair like Silas and a strong, healthy cry. Silas sat beside her on the bed, staring at their son with wonder. "He's beautiful." "He is." "What should we name him?" Elena had been thinking about this for months. "What about Samuel, after your father?" Silas's eyes filled with tears. "Yeah, Samuel, that's perfect." The children crowded around to meet their new brother. June was gentle and awed, touching his tiny fingers with wonder. Caleb declared him the smallest person he'd ever seen. Rowan stood back, watching with a small smile. "You all right?" Elena asked him. "Yeah, this is really happening, isn't it? We're a real family now." "We were always a real family," Elena said. "This just makes it official." Life with a baby was chaotic. Samuel didn't sleep well, which meant Elena didn't sleep well, which meant everyone was tired and cranky. But there was joy, too, in his first smile, his first laugh, the way he'd grab onto Silas's finger and hold on like he'd never let go. The ranch continued to grow. They bought more livestock, expanded the garden, even hired a hand to help with the heavy work. The debt was paid off completely, and for the first time in years, Silas had money in savings. One evening in October, almost 2 years since Elena had first arrived, they held a small celebration. Friends from town came, neighbors stopped by, and Mrs. Patterson brought a cake. They gathered in the yard under the cottonwood and the oak sapling, which had grown taller and stronger. Harrison came too, surprisingly. He shook Silas's hand and nodded to Elena. "You've done well," he said. "Both of you." "Thank you," Silas said, "for dropping that claim, for being reasonable." "Your wife convinced me," Harrison said. "She's got a good head on her shoulders." Later, as the sun was setting and people were starting to leave, Elena stood with Samuel in her arms, watching the children play. June was showing off her reading skills to anyone who would listen. Caleb was demonstrating how high he could climb the oak tree. Rowan was talking to the carpenter about a project he was working on. Silas came up beside her and put his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. Elena looked at him, at the life they'd built, at the family they'd become. "Yeah, I really am." "Me too." They stood there together as the sky turned pink and gold, and Elena thought about how far they'd all come. She thought about the scared girl who'd climbed into a stranger's wagon, convinced her life was over. About the broken man who'd been so consumed by grief he couldn't see past it. About the children who'd lost their mother and learned to love again. She thought about how none of this had been easy, how there had been fights and fears and moments when it felt like everything would fall apart, how they'd made mistakes and hurt each other and had to learn how to forgive. But they'd done it. They'd built something real and lasting and good. "You know what I realized?" Elena said. "What?" "I used to think home was a place, somewhere you went to feel safe. But it's not. Home is the people who see you at your worst and choose to stay anyway. It's the work you do together, and the laughter you share, and the way you hold each other up when everything feels impossible." Silas kissed her temple. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you." "I didn't teach you that." "Yes, you did. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. It's showing up even when it's hard. It's fighting for something worth keeping." Silas turned her to face him, their baby between them, and looked at her with everything he felt written plain on his face. "I choose you 1,000 times over, in any life, any world. It'd always be you." "Same," Elena whispered. "It'd always be you." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, the Boone family stood together under the Wyoming sky. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. They'd all been broken in different ways, had all lost something they could never get back. But they'd found each other in the wreckage and built something new. And maybe that was the point of it all. That healing wasn't about going back to who you were before the hurt. It was about becoming someone new, someone who carried the scars but wasn't defined by them. Someone who'd learned that love was stronger than grief, that hope could grow in the hardest soil, and that family wasn't just about blood or law or tradition. It was about choice, about standing beside someone and saying, "I'm with you, no matter what comes." The girl who'd been sold for $50 had become the woman who held a family together. The man who'd thought his heart was buried with his first wife had learned he had room for more love than he'd imagined. The children who'd lost their mother had gained something different, but just as real. They were imperfect and flawed, and still learning.
but they were together. And in the end, that was everything.
Years would pass. Samuel would grow, and there would be more children after him. Rowan would become a master carpenter, building furniture that people traveled miles to buy. Caleb would take over the ranch when Silas grew too old, running it with the same stubborn determination his father had. June would marry a teacher and have a house full of books and laughter. And Elena and Silas would grow old together, sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play under the cottonwood and the oak tree that had grown tall and strong, their branches intertwining overhead. But all of that was still to come. Tonight, they were just a family standing under the stars, holding on to each other, and the life they'd fought so hard to build. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.